The global power balance is shifting. Here's how the BRICS nations plan to change the rules.
I would certainly characterize India as a country which is non-West.
BRICS actually gained a second momentum.
West seems to be quite vociferous in trying to curtail funding for the war in Ukraine. There will always be two axes. At this point, I think it's an understood, accepted fact that you have the West, US-led, you have China as the next potential axis. Where does India fit into this? But are you planning to not pick a side?
No, I'm sorry. That is exactly where I disagree with you. This is the construct you are trying to impose on me, and I don't accept it. Europe has to grow out of the mindset that Europe's problems are the world's problems, but the world's problems are not Europe's problems.
Have you ever felt that your voice doesn't count? Like, no matter what you say, the same few people always make the decisions. And have you ever imagined what would happen if the rest of the group finally stood up and said, enough is enough? That's the vibe we're getting from the BRICS nations right now. Today, we're diving into a fascinating shift in global power dynamics. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, along with other countries from the global south, are saying a big no to the current way the United Nations, UN, and other global bodies operate. They feel like they've been benched for too long and are now demanding a fair shot at the game. We're going to explore why these countries are fed up, what changes they're proposing, and what all this means for the future of global governance. Stick around because this is a story of power, fairness, and the push for a new world order that could affect us all. Let's talk about something that really bugs the BRICS nations, what they see as Western bias and double standards in international organizations. Picture this. In a classroom, a few kids get in trouble for talking, but others doing the same thing are ignored. It's not fair, right? That's how the BRICS nations feel about how the UN and other global bodies handle human rights issues. Countries like China and Russia often find themselves under the spotlight for human rights violations. It's like they're always being called out for not following the rules. But when Western countries face similar issues, it's like those problems get swept under the rug or don't get as much attention. This uneven treatment makes the BRICS nations feel like they're being unfairly picked on, while others get a free pass. This perception of bias creates a lot of distrust. Imagine being part of a club where some members are constantly singled out and criticized, while others aren't held to the same standards. It's no wonder the BRICS nations are unhappy and want changes. They believe that for the UN and other organizations to be truly fair and effective, they need to address these double standards and ensure that everyone is treated equally. This would help build trust and make these global bodies more inclusive and just. Now, let's tackle another big issue: economic conditions and sovereignty. Imagine you're in a tight spot and need help from a friend, but they only agree if you do things their way, which doesn't really help you solve your problem. That's how many global South countries, including BRICS members, feel when dealing with Western-led institutions like the World Bank and the IMF. These countries often need financial assistance and development aid to grow and improve their economies. But here's the catch. The help comes with a lot of strings attached. These conditions often seem designed to benefit the Western countries more than the ones actually receiving the aid. It's like being given a loan by a friend, but only if you spend the money on what they want, not what you really need. This approach can make it really hard for these countries to address their own unique challenges and priorities. These conditions can also feel like a loss of control. Countries want to make their own decisions about how to develop and grow, just like you'd want to decide how to spend your own money. But when the conditions are too strict or don't align with their goals, it feels like their sovereignty, their ability to govern themselves, is being undermined. It's no surprise that this system frustrates the BRICS nations. They want a fairer approach that respects their right to determine their own economic policies and paths to development without being overly influenced by external powers. Now let's talk about geopolitics, the big power struggles happening on the world stage. It's like a massive game of chess where every move counts, but sometimes it feels like some players are trying to knock others off the board. That's what's happening with countries like Russia and China, and it's making things even trickier. You see, Western countries often see Russia and China as rivals, like they're on opposite teams competing for control and influence. When these rivalries heat up, Western countries might slap sanctions or use political pressure against them. It's like they're trying to keep Russia and China from getting too powerful. But from the BRICS nations' perspective, it feels like they're being unfairly targeted just for trying to make their mark on the world stage. This adversarial stance creates even more tension and dissatisfaction with how international institutions operate. It's like playing in a game where some players keep changing the rules to favor their own team. The BRICS nations want the game to be fair and square, where everyone gets a chance to play without unfair interference or bias. So these geopolitical rivalries add another layer of complexity to an already tangled situation. The BRICS nations are pushing back against what they see as attempts to sideline them, and they're demanding a fairer playing field where everyone's contributions are valued equally. It's all about finding a balance and making sure no one feels left out in this global game.
A profound transformation of international relations is taking place in front of our eyes. It is associated with the formation of a more just, polycentric system of the world order.
Now, let's talk about what the BRICS nations are aiming for, a more multipolar world order. It's like they want to rearrange the seating at the global table so everyone has a fair spot. They're tired of feeling like they're always sitting at the kids' table while the adults make all the decisions. So, what's their plan? Well, they're working on setting up their own clubs and institutions where they have more say. It's like when you're not happy with how your current club is run, so you decide to start your own, where everyone's ideas are valued equally. One example is the New Development Bank, a bank run by BRICS nations to help fund big projects without relying on Western banks. It's their way of saying, hey, we can do this on our own terms. They're also talking about creating their own currency, like a BRICS coin. It's like having your own currency for your club, so you're not always using someone else's. This would reduce their reliance on Western financial systems and give them more control over their own economies. By setting up these parallel institutions and mechanisms, the BRICS nations are sending a clear message. They want a fairer system that respects everyone's interests and contributions. It's all about creating a world where power and decision-making aren't just concentrated in the hands of a few, but are shared more evenly among all players. Now let's talk about how the BRICS group is growing and gaining more influence. It's like they're inviting more friends to join their club because they know their strength in numbers. Recently, they've expanded to include countries like Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, and Ethiopia.
In addition to the member states of BRICS, 12 countries from Asia, Africa, and Latin America were invited.
By bringing in these new members, the BRICS nations are saying, hey, we're stronger together. It's like adding more players to your team to make sure you have all the skills you need to win the game. This expanded group now represents a huge chunk of the world's economy and population, which gives them even more leverage and bargaining power.
Officials say the group's goal is not to become an exclusive club in the world, rather an integration force that strengthens collective efforts to promote global economic growth and justice.
With more countries on board, they're making a stronger case for why they should have a bigger say in how global institutions are run. It's like going from being a small group of friends to a big team that can't be ignored. Together, they're pushing for a world where everyone's voice matters, regardless of where they're from or how big their economy is. All right, let's take a closer look at the United Nations, UN, and why it's been under fire lately. Picture this. The UN is like a big house where countries come together to talk about how to make the world a better place. But just like any house, it's got its flaws. The UN was set up back in 1945 after World War II to keep the peace and prevent another global disaster. It's got two main parts, the General Assembly and the Security Council. The General Assembly is where all the countries get to have a say, kind of like a big town hall meeting where everyone's voice counts the same. Then there's the Security Council, a smaller, more exclusive club with just 15 members. But here's the catch. 5 of those members, called the P5, are permanent and super powerful. They are the United States, the United Kingdom, France, China, and Russia, and each of them has a veto power. It's like giving a handful of people the ability to slam the brakes on any decision they don't like. This setup has some serious flaws. Imagine trying to get stuff done in your house, but a few family members can say no to everything, even if it's for the greater good. When these big countries use their veto power, it can make it really hard for the UN to take action, especially in times of crisis. This means the UN sometimes struggles to do its job effectively, putting the interests of a few powerful nations above what's best for everyone. And that's been causing a lot of frustration and criticism.
I'm 1/5 of the world's population. I am, today, the 5th or 6th largest economy in the world. I mean, forget the history, civilization bit, everybody knows that. But I think I'm entitled to have my own side. I'm entitled to weigh my own interests, make my own choices. And my choices will not be cynical and transactional, but they will be a balance of my values and my interests.
Now, let's talk about the UN's special teams, the specialized agencies that do some pretty important work. It's like having different squads within your club, each focusing on specific areas like health, education, and preserving culture. Take the World Health Organization, for example. They're like the doctors and nurses of the world, working hard to keep everyone healthy and safe. Then there's the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, which is all about making sure everyone gets a good education and preserving our shared history and culture. These agencies do some really vital stuff that makes a big difference in people's lives around the globe. But despite the great work these specialized agencies do, the Security Council, the big decision-making body, has been dropping the ball. It's like having your team captain missing important shots in the game. The world is changing fast, but the Security Council hasn't been able to keep up. This failure to adapt has hurt the UN's reputation and how effective it is. Imagine trying to fix a leaky boat with a bucket that has holes in it. It just doesn't work. When the Security Council can't make the tough decisions needed to tackle today's challenges like climate change or conflicts, it makes people question if the UN can really get the job done, and that's a big problem.
This meeting, we've had the first foreign ministers meeting of an expanded BRICS membership. And really the deliberations have shown a commonality of ideas, of approaches, and interests in terms of the further development of the global community.
Now, let's talk about what could be done to fix the UN or even replace it with something better. It's like renovating your house when it starts falling apart, or maybe even building a whole new one. Many people think if the UN were scrapped, we'd need a brand new organization to handle the big global issues. Some people say the UN setup is outdated, especially the way those 5 powerful countries can just slam the brakes on any decision they don't like. So, what's the solution? Well, experts have some ideas up their sleeves. One suggestion is creating a whole new gang called the Democratic Nations, DN. It's like bringing together a bunch of countries that are all about fairness and democracy. They'd have a 2-part system where every country, big or small, gets a fair say. It's a bit like making sure every player on your team gets to have their say in the game plan. Another idea is to beef up smaller groups like the G20. They're like mini UNs made up of the world's biggest economies. Strengthening these regional gangs could help deal with global problems faster and more effectively than the UN can right now. It's like forming smaller committees within your club to handle different tasks, so things get done quicker and smoother. These are just a couple of the ideas floating around, but they show that there are alternatives to the current UN setup. It's all about finding a system that works better for everyone and helps tackle the big challenges we face as a planet. But hold on a second. There are some worries about these new ideas too. While beefing up smaller groups like the G20 might sound good, there's a catch. These groups don't represent everyone. It's like forming a club with only the biggest kids and leaving out the smaller ones. The problem with this is that it goes against what the UN is all about: equal representation for everyone, no matter how big or small. If we strengthen these regional gangs too much, it could create a messy situation. Imagine having multiple clubs in your school, each with its own rules and leaders. It could get pretty chaotic. This could lead to a fragmented international system where different groups have their own rules and ways of doing things. It's like having too many cooks in the kitchen, making it hard to agree on anything. Global cooperation might become even more complicated than it already is, which is the last thing we need when facing big challenges like climate change or pandemics. So while shaking things up might seem like a good idea, we've got to be careful not to create more problems than we solve. Finding a balance between making things fairer and keeping things running smoothly is going to be key to any changes we make in the global system.
Do we have multiple options? Answer is yes. Is that a problem? Why should it be a problem? If I'm smart enough to have multiple options, you should be admiring me. You shouldn't be criticizing.
So where does that leave us? Well, one thing's for sure. We need a better way to run things on a global scale, but we've got to make sure that everyone's voice is heard along the way. The debate about how to do this is far from over. Some folks think we need to shake up the whole system and start fresh, while others believe we can tweak things to make them better. Whatever the solution, we've got to find a balance. At the end of the day, what we really need is a system that's fairer and more capable of dealing with all the big challenges we face today. It's like fixing a broken bridge. We've got to make sure it's strong enough to carry everyone across safely. So let's keep the conversation going and work towards a world where every country, big or small, has a seat at the table. Because when we all work together, there's no problem we can't solve. It's going to take some effort, but it's worth it for a brighter, fairer future for us all. What do you think we should do? Share your opinions and ideas in the comments section below, and to watch the latest geopolitical news, watch this video here.